Okay, welcome everyone to our class this week. We are going to delve about on how the giving of the Torah and how giving of the Ten Commandments transpired. The verse tells us in chapter 20, verse 1 of the book of Exodus and of Shmos, Chof in Aleph, and it starts off as follows. The verse says, "Vaydaber Elokim es kol hadvarim ha'ela leimer." Now, this pasuk is a very opens itself up to a number of questions. Most principally, the verse as translated by Daber Elokim, Hashem spoke and said, as kol advorim, all these words, as kol advorim eli, all these words, lemor, and said. Now, that seems to be a repetition of the word or the idea of speaking. What does it mean by Daber Elokim that Hashem spoke these words? Lamer, normally in a regular context of other verses in the Torah, when we have a typical expression of the usage of Vaydaber, then that means that Hashem has spoken to Moshe, and then as he's teaching him or speaking to them, he will relay these words or whatever this communication that he's had from Hashem, and he will pass them on further to the Jewish nation at a specific point in time. But at the time of the giving of the Torah, as the lead up to it and the discussion, all the Bnei Yisro were all collected around the mountain, Har Sinai. The clouds and the fiery clouds of Hashem's presence had descended on Har Sinai. A voice came out to the people saying the Ten Commandments. So the Aseret Adibros, the Ten Commandments, everybody was there at that time. It's not appropriate to say the last words of Lamor, to say regularly, as I said, Vaydaber will be a communication to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe would do this communication Lamor to the Bnei Yisrael. But since everybody was there, since everybody was present, every Jew that was alive was present at Har Sinai, right? So there wasn't anyone else to tell it to. There isn't this idea of Lamor. Now we have the idea. One of the ideas which relate to this is Lamor refers to the other generations. But our sages tell us that all the generations, all the neshamas, whether they were in a body or whether they were yet to be born, not in a body, were all there as well. So from that respect, there's no one for whom Moshe Rabbeinu needs to repeat the Aseret Adibros. So in that case, what is the idea? What is the import of the word Lamor? So this is looked at to an address, right? In a certain circumstance. One of the interpretations in that the idea of Lamor is that the Bnei Yisrael were required to answer, to respond to Hashem on the idea of the Ten Commandments. That is, for each commandment, they are required to give a response. So the Jewish people are required to respond, and we are told that in the in the interpretations given by the Mechilta that after Lamor comes to teach us that after each dibur, after each communication from Hashem, the Bnei Yisrael gave a verbal reply. And they, by virtue of giving this verbal reply, they acknowledged the commandment, and they acknowledged that commandment and they accepted it. So the Mechilta goes on and says, what exactly did they say? Telling us what exactly they said. So the Mechilta records actually a machlekes between two of our great sages. The great sages agree that on the positive commandments, everybody had agreed and said, yes, we will do. They responded with a yes, we will do it. And that is, and everybody agrees on the positive ones that they said yes, but on the negative ones, on the negative commandments, we find that there is a machlekes. Who is doing the arguing? Which opinions are recorded as differentiating themselves? The famous Rabbi Akiva and the famous Rabbi Yishmael. They had two different opinions. As we previously said, on the positives, they agreed that the Bnei Yisrael said, yes, we will do. But on the negative commandments, we find that Rabbi Akiva says, yes, we will do. And Rabbi Yishmael says, no, we will not do them. So it's an interesting understanding. In essence, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael seems to be saying the same thing. Rabbi Yishmael said that they answered, no, we will not do them. And Rabbi Akiva says, yes, we will listen to the commandment and hence not do it. So in that case, what is the difference between the two, and why are they recorded as two differing opinions? Surely saying, no, I will not hurt my friend, and saying, yes, I will listen to your commandment and refrain from hurting my friend, that surely seems to be the same. So is this merely a playing of words, or is there some deeper significance in that they recorded as saying, as being different? Okay, so this discussion, this difference of opinion is brought in the books as there are really an argument which is sourced into some other aspect. The original source of this argument derives from something, from some other approach of Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Their approach to learning Torah, and that can be investigated via another aspect of the giving of the Torah, of the events that happened at the giving of the Torah. As I said, the parsha of the Aseret Dibra starts in chapter 20, verse 1. As you look at a little bit further past the enumeration of the 10 commandments, and that finishes at verse 14. If you look at verse 15, and I will read it out, right? Verse 15 says, "B'chol ha'om roi mesakeles," and in describing the event of all the tumultuous changes that were happening as God came down and spoke to the Bnei Yisrael on Har Sinai, it says, "V'chol ha'om roi mesakeles," the entire people could see the voices, and then it continues on, the verse continues, and they heard the voice of the shofar, etc. So Rashi immediately picks up on that expression, see the voices. What does that mean? See the voices, right? How can you see voices? So Rashi brings down that they saw what can be heard. Now, to understand what that means, that they saw what is seemingly a noise, they saw literally, they saw something which was audible, right? Which is, as Rashi continued, is impossible to see in any other circumstance. But the circumstance of the giving of the Torah, and where God speaking to the people, that people could actually hear and experience godliness at that point, was a circumstance that's beyond nature. That's not a normal event. So at the same time, in that non-normal event, at that time when miraculous things were happening, as an example, it says all the people could see, or all the people heard. So our sages comment, what does it mean? All the people could see. Surely there are people that had some sort of physical issues and challenges that didn't allow them. So the Midrashim comment that prior to the giving of the Torah, all the people were healed, so that they would be able to hear and see all the event which was going to happen. In a similar sense, at this point, since it was a state of beyond being normal, it was out of the bounds of physical existence, that they heard and they saw representation of godliness. So at that point, they could also see what is normally heard. So Mechilta, our same sense of interpretation, also has an expression from Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva says on the incident, on this verse, he says, the Mechilta says, that Rabbi Akiva said, that which they saw something which is normally heard, and continuation, they could hear what is normally only seen. Rabbi Ishmael says that they saw what is usually seen, and they heard which is usually heard. So meaning to say that verse in verse 15, which says that the people could see the sound, is not to be according to Rabbi Akiva, is supposed to be literal, and according to Rabbi Shmuel, not necessarily be taken to be taken literally. Understanding that leads us into understanding our original idea of why Rabbi Akiva says that they answered yes to the positive commandments and even yes to the negative commandments, while Rabbi Shmuel says that they answered yes to the positive and to the no. How is this connected? How does this connect exactly? Let's delve a little bit further into this idea. The difference of the discussion really revolves around the idea of what's the difference between hearing and seeing, and what's a conceptual difference between hearing and seeing. So, reiterating, Rabbi Yishmael said that the Jews saw what is usually seen, so therefore the flames that appeared when Hashem came down on the mountain were seen, and they heard the voice of Hashem. They heard voices which is really heard, the sounds. While Rabbi Akiva says that they saw what is usually heard, that is, that they saw something which is normally audible, and conversely, they heard what is normally seen. So how do we connect that? What's this idea? So if we come to the conceptual idea of what is the difference between hearing and seeing, we'll get an insight and specifically we'll get a spiritual insight in the differential between these two life approaches and relationship to what we understand to be reality, and how reality, or what we understand to be reality, permeates our consciousness. Usually you take the approach that when we see things in a spiritual sense, we take it in and we absorb it in a virtual sense, in a spiritual sense, not necessarily one which is touching us in a physical sense. So therefore, we can say that spirituality, godliness, is something that we put together. It's like hearing a sentence. I have to hear word one first, word two first, word three, and then I'm putting it together, and I string it together. I perceive it. I understand it. I'm putting it together, and I get an approach to it. Things which are physical around the world next to me, I see them. I experience them. I experience them directly. I don't have to hear about it. I see it, and I experience on it. When I talk about spirituality, I believe that it exists, but it remains abstract. It's something that I have to piece together bit by bit in my brain. So at Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah, there was a different circumstance. At that circumstance was a time when the boundaries of physicality and spirituality were broken. God came down on the mountain, and man, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Bnei Yisrael, went up the mountain. Hashem lowered himself to make himself visible and appreciable to the Jews and to the human being, to a finite world, and that's represented by coming down the mountains. And the Jews elevated themselves. They went up. This is essentially the concept of what the two rabbis were saying. The Jews were elevated to a point where what is normally for them something which is in the realm of audible, something that it takes time to put together, that is the spiritual existence, the spirituality is something which a person needs to be lifted up to and brought up to understand. What happened at Matan Torah was that they saw the spirituality to such an extent that no proofs were necessary in relationship to that world. That is to say that this level of perception of spirituality wasn't like hearing anymore. It was in a state of, was a state of seeing. And not only that, Rabbi Akiva wants to tell us, and Rabbi Akiva wants to emphasize to us by saying that they saw what is normally heard, and conversely they heard what is normally seen, is that their appreciation of spirituality had been elevated to a point where something which is normally heard, they could see, and physicality, which is something that people are normally 100% positive about. They know it's there, it's existed, it's here, I can touch it and see it. That reduced itself and came something to the level of coming to the level of hearing. It was something of the level that they saw, they could see through the physicality and see only the potential there for utilization within the realm of spirituality. So then they reduce their dependency on the idea of the world of the physicality, and that's the and that's being the idea of the expression that Rabbi Akiva uses, that they heard what they would regularly see. That means to say that the physicality and their spirituality took on different dimensions and different and this different existence. So now that viewpoint that they expressed themselves also in their appreciation of doing mitzvahs. When a person is sure about the world's existence and says that everything in the realm of the physical is certainly here and it exists and it's primary, then when a person sees an object that might be used for a mitzvah, all they see the physical objects. Hence, an animal hide, what they see, animal hide can be transformed into parchment, and that parchment used in a sefer Torah, in a scroll. The fact that this and any animal hide that exists can be potentially used for a mitzvah is a secondary function and doesn't really define the essence of it. But if a person takes a different view, if a person has the perception that godliness and God's presence is the certainty, and all the other physical areas around her are illusionary, then when a person sees an animal skin, what does he see? If a person's at that level, he would say, this is something which could potentially be used for a mitzvah. The parchment can be used as a scroll on a mezuzah. If so, we have a very different definition of existence. The definition of existence isn't anymore that the animal skin, this scroll is something which can be utilized for a mitzvah. Its existence really is an opportunity to be able to be used for a mitzvah. Its essence becomes that opportunity or that potential for utilization for a mitzvah. So then, according to Rabbi Akiva, this is the way the Bnei Yisro viewed and were elevated and brought up to at the time of the giving of the Torah. They didn't see the physical objects; they saw opportunities for a mitzvah. And the same is true for negative mitzvahs as well. If you think about the idea of as one of the mitzvahs, one of the commandments, you shall not steal, right? They don't see this necessarily as a wicked act. All they saw, when you see a chance to fulfill a mitzvah, the mitzvah of lo signal, to refrain from stealing. And then this becomes the meaning of Rabbi Akiva's statement, that they answered yes to both a positive and a negative commandment. Just like we say that at the time of the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah, they saw what is audible because they had become elevated to a new mode of existence, temporary as it was, but they were elevated at that time to a new mode of existence. And they saw it and experienced it at that time, then we can understand the idea of the word lamer. We understood the word lamer to say that they were required to give a response. So when Rabbi Akiva says that they said yes to the positive and yes to the negative, It means that they were so much involved, and the elevation that they had, that they were connecting to Hashem, that they said yes to both positive and yes to the negative mitzvahs. And even when they were told about negative ideas such as stealing or signal, all they saw was the potential in there for positive, to be able to fulfill God's will. And because we say and we connect, as we do in the idea of the basic prayer, Hashem Echad, Hashem is one, we see in that Hashem's positive mitzvahs and Hashem's negative mitzvahs, Hashem's expression as he expressed in the as he shows himself in the expression Yud Kei Vav Kei, in the name of Hashem, spelled with the Yud Hey and the Vav Kei, as that name is the same as the name Elokim, as God, how he expresses himself through nature. It is, and it all becomes one. This is the idea of Rabbi Akiva. Now, we find Rabbi Akiva expressed that this is not the only time when we see Rabbi Akiva expressing this type of expression. Rabbi Akiva is listed as one of the great martyrs when the Romans had taken over and Israel and banned teachings, and Rabbi Akiva was put into jail, and then eventually was killed and he went through the stage of giving up his life at the time when he said Shema Yisrael, and they brutally tortured and murdered him. At that time, we are told that he said that his students were with him and recognized that he was saying Shema, and they said to him, "How is it possible that you could say Shema to such an extent? Are you going through this pain and suffering to such an extent that you're saying Shema at this point?" So he replied to them, and this is recorded as we understand that he said, "All my life I yearned to fulfill the mitzvah of Ahavta Hashem and loving Hashem to the point where it means giving up your soul, and here I am at that opportunity, and I'm taking and I'm doing it." The students were so surprised, and they were said, "Up to such an extent you're capable." Trying to analyze what was happening at that time, right? We have to understand what was the question of the students, and what was Rabbi Akiva's answer. The Rabbi Akiva's students were basically saying to him, "How is it possible that you can be? We understand that you can be focused to the point where you're not looking at your pain, and you're saying a prayer before you'll pass away, and your capability of focusing is so strong." That we understand. What we don't understand is how you can be at the state of being in this massive torture and not being consumed by everything about what was happening at this time. There's no bigger contradiction between the greatest teacher and being killed for the purpose for the Torah. Isn't there a contradiction? How could you be expressing the idea of Shema Yisrael, that the love of Hashem, and that the idea that Hashem is one at this point, when you're in the middle of this consummate evil, and you're seeing this, and you're seeing everything happen at this point, And Rabbi Akiva replied to them, but yes, this is really also an expression. I don't see the negative in it. I don't see, as we explain, I don't see the low signif, I don't see the negative aspect. All I see is that I have the opportunity now to fulfill a verse of the Torah of giving up my soul on behalf of Hashem. So from this point of view, this is a different perspective of understanding how we are to face the negativities and the problems within the world. We have the approach of Rabbi Akiva. The approach of Rabbi Akiva is that he was a person who came from the he was a convert, or he came from the families. In his family was the history of were converts, and he could see things. He had a different look. He had a different perspective on the world. He could incorporate a perspective of even the things which are not part of the initial creation of godliness, something that didn't start its life in a realm of godliness, being incorporated and elevated up to the realms of Hashem, and being incorporated and being used, and the opportunity being taken to become incorporated in the highest realms of Hashem. So although we can see that at this point there was a lot of pain and negativity surrounding Rabbi Akiva's life, at that time he could take and incorporate the negatives and turn them and convert them and transform them, and only see the positive in it. And this was a teaching. This is a teaching that we can take from the level that the Bnei Yisrael was at the time of Matan Torah, that we can understand and say that Hashem is giving us the Torah every single day anew, and we can strive to reach a level of awareness, a level of holiness, in which we can see physicality as simply the tool and medium of implementing God's will into this world. And then we can be like the Bnei Yisrael and see the positive even in the negative commandments. And then we can do that same, so that when we encounter something which is seemingly negative in the world, or some sort of struggle or some sort of challenge, we can look for the positive aspect of it, since we believe and say that Hashem creates the world every second anew, and he recreating this particular struggle that we have, and this particular obstacle that we might have. And this purpose of creation is that so that the Bnei Yisrael should be able to fulfill Hashem's will via his Torah and mitzvahs. So this difficulty also, this challenge also is connected to that, and is there and exists for a reason. And that reason, and keeping this in mind, makes it easier to overcome this particular challenge, knowing that it was placed there just to provide another opportunity to serve Hashem in this world. We have a saying about making a blessing, that when, for instance, if a person, we want to eat a fruit, we have to say a bracha, beirukri ha'etz, we make a blessing on it. And when do we make, and when do we make this blessing? We make this blessing when we feel motivated. We need to eat. So we make the blessing before we eat. A person who's on a different realm, a person's in a spiritual realm, and he notes that there is spirituality everywhere and he wants to incorporate spirituality, doesn't necessarily make that same bracha for the same reasons that we do. Going back, if I feel hungry, and the emphasis is me, I feel hungry, right? So then I see an apple, and before I eat, I condition myself so that I understand that this fruit is here in order for me to be able to utilize in my service of Hashem. So, and prior to using it, I make a blessing to remind myself and to elevate this piece of fruit and incorporate it in my Jewish experience. A person who's in the zone and in the experience where he sees physicality as the opportunity to use a mitzvah, doesn't necessarily eat because they're hungry. They'll see that there's a need for spirituality to exist in this world, and then we'll eat in order that to bring that spirituality that happens by eating the food and making the blessing, bringing that into the world. When we exist on this different plane, on this different perspective, we can then understand that the different challenges, the different nisyanuses that we have, we can approach them and incorporate them in our lives, elevating and making the world a more spiritual place. We continue with the Ten Commandments. We continue with the teachings that we've had that we've had this week's about the positive commandments and the negative commandments in the Ten Commandments. We join them together. We understand that they are really two sides of the same coin. That coin of doing the will of Hashem. So, and with that, it gives us the impetus to move forward and to continue and to elevate all the opportunities, spiritual opportunities that we have in the world. With that, I wish you everyone a good week and have an enjoyable Shabbos.